Batman finally gets honored on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Disney gets accused of having both a gay agenda and also an anti-gay agenda in the same week. And it looks like we're about to get an epic Bible cinematic universe. We talk about all this and more on this week's episode of Faith and Pop Culture. Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 29 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the Mike Tyson to my Evander Holyfield's ear, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is that?
Oh, it's good to be with you, Daniel. Nice to be off. We had Eli last week with us.
Yeah, we hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as we did. He's a good guy.
Great guy. Shout out to Eli, bringing the film heat, as he always does.
He brings more of the class to the conversation that at times may be sorely lacking in this book.
At times, but, you know, from time to time.
And we'll definitely have him back on, on some regular episodes. And we're excited, too. There's other guests. We sort of dipped our toe, let Eli be the guinea pig.
We
have some.
We made all of our rookie mistakes setting up the streaming and everything with Eli. So thank you for.
Yeah, and it's fun to get a different perspective. And really, there are very few things that I enjoy as much as just talking to people that know things that I don't know.
Yeah.
Especially when it relates to, the arts. And so we're excited to get some people that are working in the industry and just other people, that just are students of it. And, just different perspectives, cultural perspectives. So stay tuned for that. But speaking of cultural perspectives, there's a lot going on. There's a lot kind of stories swimming out there in the pop culture world for ones I think as Christians are important, or at least interesting to wade into and sort of navigate. The first one is not necessarily a heavy-hitting story, but
though it's dark.
Yeah, it is quite dark and grim, at least in recent years, and that is Batman. If you have the chance to talk about Batman on a podcast, you take that chance. Yeah. And the chance is because he is being honored, as is his due, because he is sort of one of the goats of the superheroes. So he will actually today, September 26th, the day this podcast is going to be released, will be honored by Hollywood as being the first superhero to receive a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which sort of I think coincides with a couple last week. Was the 85th anniversary. He's looking good. He gets the senior discount, but he can still kick butt when
he doesn't age. Yeah, that guy.
One of the many wonders about that character. And it's interesting because Batman, he's everywhere. He's been everywhere. Yeah. At least recently. In some ways, it's not a surprise at all that he's sort of the first. And again, by Batman we mean not the actors playing Batman.
By Batman, the character.
The real Batman.
Yeah.
Will be getting a star on the Walk of Fame. In some ways, it's not surprising that he's sort of the first superhero to get it, given that he's sort of, if you ask people their favorite superheroes, or if you just look at what the kind of movies being made, there's tons of Batman movies, tons of Batman series. They just released the mini series based on their latest Batman movie featuring the Penguin.
That was this last weekend.
Yeah, so and I don't think Batman himself is in the series, but that universe seems to be everywhere.
Well, Gotham, that's sort of
there's something about
ever present in our pop
dark
culture.
Gloominess of Gotham. So in some ways it's not surprising. In other ways, let's not be too quick to forget Superman. He exists too.
Also a superhero. Puts the super in hero. In fact,
he has super in his name, and he doesn't have a star. What do you think some of that is? Maybe it's a two-parter. One, why Batman? Why does he, even 85 years later, just going as strong as he ever has?
Yeah.
Maybe the other part of it is why not other people? Why is it seems like Superman? I know James Gunn's making a Superman movie, maybe to come out next year. But he's been having a lot of free time lately because he hasn't been showing up.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons why I think Batman has sort of remained a more salient cultural superhero icon, I think, than Superman. And I think partly it's because he's not a deity, or he hasn't been bitten with a radioactive spider or anything like that. And so I think there's a relational sense to him that I think many people could I'm not going to be, come from another planet, but I could maybe spend some time in the wilderness and hone my craft and become, insanely wealthy and fight.
I could be a
bad
billionaire,
guys.
Jacked up guy that knows ninja and can save.
Right. So I think, like, obviously, like, no one would do that, but like, I think there's that sense of attainability with Batman, and I think the fact that it is also, he's sort of that flawed superhero, and I think there's something really relatable, I think, just to culture at large with that kind of a hero. It's like, maybe he's not the hero we want, but it's the hero we deserve, kind of thing, where he, you kind of have to take Batman warts and all, whereas with Superman, I think he's maybe perceived almost, I mean, he is this Christ figure, and it's almost like there's no flaws, and so it makes him less interesting.
Yeah, I think there is
as
a degree
character.
of just, I think it's easier to make a Batman movie than it is a Superman movie. Like, I think
Yeah.
sort of he is a bit more of like an underdog. He's, some of the tension is very, like, not that it doesn't go deep, but it's also very easy to portray on the surface of like the most recent one. Like, he's wants to do good, but he's also like super angry, and he has to find that line between being the hero and the villain. Like, that's
Right.
That's an easy narrative, to explore. Like, there's tons of ways to go with that.
Yeah.
But I think like Superman is just a different type of narrative that doesn't have the same, there is some of those tensions, but like, he is more perfect. Like, he's
Right.
doesn't have as many weaknesses. Like, he's very idealistic. He's not necessarily, unless you're Zack Snyder making him, like, you're not necessarily struggling with some of those same issues. So I think there is a degree of that. I think it also, like you said, I think it just, in some ways, it reflects just how our culture feels about more like idealistic stuff these days. Because it's interesting. There's a documentary called Super / Man, the Christopher Reeve story, which I think just the documentary just came out, I think, last week for a couple of days, on the life of like the actor that played those classic Superman movies. I don't know if you saw any. Have you seen the trailer?
I've seen some.
It looked really good. Like, I wanted to see it. I wasn't in town, and it was only showing for 2 days, and because like the actor eventually he plays Superman, and then he ends up paralyzed, and it's sort of this like contrast of like he plays this perfect can't be hurt in real life, and then he's struggling with mortality and stuff, and a lot of interesting stuff. But just like through that trailer, just being reminded some of like the reverence of the Superman character, like, well, at least like what there used to be, like Superman, like he represented all the goodness that we strive for, and like, and it just seems like that's not there anymore. Like Superman, like the most recent Supermans have almost like, okay, if we're gonna include Superman, like you got to pull him down and kind of make him like like a quasi Batman character, and he's sort of angry too, and he strip him from a lot of the more like idealistic stuff, and I don't know, like maybe that's just because we're more cynical these days, or like
I think so. I mean, I think that's probably a big part of it, and I think I don't know. I feel like maybe Superman was a bigger deal, like in the 50s was maybe. I really have no reference of when all that, but it seems to me like if you look at maybe even just like the economics of America, like full of idealism after World War II, and like gung ho, like you could work a normal job and buy a house and raise a family and send them to college, and there was like, I think there was just so much idealism in America, like through the 50s, that I think he just stuck more at that time, and I think as time goes on, there's just been less and less idealism. We've had more recessions. We're more exposed to like the more global issues, and I think that kind of takes some of that shine of idealism kind of off the surface, and I think that's why I think people of our generation would attach more to Batman than they would to
and I think
Superman.
maybe even like I think all that is true. Maybe even like another aspect of that is like the more religious sense of, I think there's sort of that more not self-centered, but more like humanistic, individualistic of like, I think the culture doesn't seem to be as open to like sort of a perfect savior coming in from the sky and like saving us and protecting us from our problems. Where Batman, although he's like, again, I'm not going to become Batman, but there is a sense that he's one of us. Like he's a man. He's a human, and he has his own limitations, but he's going to fight the good fight, be the hero. He sort of represents. And I feel like that's that becomes more related, like sort of taking the law into our own hands.
Yeah.
You know, because like Superman's not a vigilante, like he's a hero.
Right.
Batman's more like the vigilante. So I think there is a sense that like as religious views have shifted, so too has sort of our preferences. But I do hope there, because I said James Gunn's making a Superman movie, and all the quotes and stuff ahead of time is like he wants to bring him back to his more like optimistic, inspirational roots. And I hope that's true.
Yeah.
I love Batman. I think he deserves a star, but hopefully Superman can join him one day. Kind of another hot button story. It's actually two stories, two for the price of one. Because I saw two things that were like next to each other in my timeline on social media, and it was interesting because they're related, but they offer two opposite perspectives, which in itself is, I think.
Would you say this is even like a Rorschach test?
Yeah, because
for the viewer.
Because it's how you feel about these reveals a lot. So we'll kind of go through the two, and then we'll dive into it. In both, kind of the umbrella for both is sort of the like Disney and kind of the alleged like LGBTQ agenda. Like sort of that's been a conversation for as long as we've been doing this podcast, and before we've been doing the podcast. That there's those themes, and especially as Christians, wondering like how do you engage with that? There's just a lot of Christians aren't happy with Disney. I don't know if you've noticed that.
I have.
Disney is not being invited to many birthday parties. But it's kind of the first story relates to the just released, at least the first couple episodes of the Marvel MCU TV show Agatha All Along, which I know you are super hyped for.
Yeah, it's so hyped that it just completely flew past my my calendar, and it's already here. Like I forgot to make a paper chain, everything.
I know, it's like waking up in October and realizing that actually it's Christmas Day.
I know.
Which again, if you can't tell, neither of us have seen the show. Neither of us are planning to see the show.
Probably not.
There's nothing about the show that interests me. Hey, if you like it, then all power to you. But sort of the stories that have been coming out, kind of the press tour, like the first when they showed the first few episodes, there are a couple of quotes on the red carpet that quickly went viral and sparked conversation and thoughts. And the first one was actress Aubrey Plaza, who in the show plays Green Witch. Again, I don't know who that is, but she's playing a character. And sort of in the red carpet, she's being asked sort of about, essentially like how gay is this show? Is like the way that the phrase, the interview is asking for this. And she responds that the show gets gayer and gayer, and then promises viewers that a gay explosion by the end. And kind of following up from that, another actress, Sashir Zamenta, who plays another character, said agreed in an interview that the show has been described as the, quote, the gayest project Marvel has ever done. And she says, I would agree with that. I think this is a show that really does a good job representing different types of people. And we can all have the power, within us to go forth and be great. So as you would expect, like that, Marvel's already, it's not in its prime right now.
Yeah.
And this, and the shows have been struggling, and these quotes.
Would you say these quotes help or hurt a show? From Marvel.
I guess that depends on how you approach this, but it's definitely not going to win back people that are tired of this. And we can maybe. Do we want to talk about the interview itself first, or move on, or what are you thinking?
Let's put a pin in it and go to the second part, and then we can kind of compare and contrast.
Because there's some interesting stuff going on with those.
Like a classic grade school essay.
Yeah. Pros, cons. So you have that side. You have the Disney
gayest Marvel show ever made.
Gay explosion, and then the other article that I came across was one that was released by IGN, who mostly does like video game coverage, but they also do some like pop culture and movies. And they had an interview or an article out on the recent Pixar movie Inside Out 2, which smashing like the highest grossing animated movie in the history of film. Like currently at $1.6 billion,
which is insane.
So this isn't like a good, this movie did well. Like this movie did better than any, like Frozen is like looking up at Inside Out 2 with jealousy. Like that's
until Frozen 3 comes out
and takes the crown. So the article itself interviewed 10 former employees. Recently, Pixar has laid off a bunch of people. Like I think I saw like 14% of the staff. So 10 of those people that are being laid off. Again, keep that in the back of your mind. These are people. These aren't like people that are feeling great about their employee or their
former
employer. And they speak on a bunch of stuff. It's about about Pete Docter's influence. He's sort of the chief executive, and just like the high pressure. Like kind of saying like, hey, the movie might have done well, but like it was not fun to make because there's a lot of pressure and stuff.
Yeah.
But probably the thing that I think is the most interesting for us today to contrast is when it came to kind of what these former employees were saying is like essentially an anti-gay agenda from Disney. Said that that the chief executives continually gave notes to decrease, turn the volume down on anything that could at all be perceived as kind of LGBTQ.
They didn't want any ambiguity in the main character's
not only
sexuality.
I don't have that in there, but I don't even leave the door open for that. So they say, it is, as far as I know, still a thing where leadership, they'll bring up Lightyear, which is the Disney or Pixar bomb from like 2 years ago, specifically, and say, oh, Lightyear was a financial failure because it had a queer kiss in it, one source said IGN. That's not the reason the movie failed. And then it says, there's a apparent resistance to touch on LGBTQ themes, the storylines in particular affect Inside Out 2's development, according to multiple sources. Said they continually got notes to make Riley, the main character in both Inside Out movies, come across, quote, less gay, leading to numerous edits that ramped up around September 2023, which led to, said even requiring edits to the lighting and the tone of certain scenes to remove any trace of romantic chemistry. One source describes it as just doing a lot of extra work to make sure that no one would potentially see them as not straight. And there's more that they kind of get into, like the details of that. But we can maybe stop there because I think it's interesting. Because the question is, does Disney have a gay agenda or an anti-gay agenda?
I know, and it would seem it has both.
Explain. How can that be true?
Well, you see, Daniel, I think this is interesting for a number of reasons. One, I think it's another example of how the movie making business is complicated and there's a lot of people involved. And I think it's easy for people online to just sort of point at whatever, pick your favorite and say, see, Disney is just blank. And like, how many headlines have you seen, over the past few years of just sort of simplifying Disney down to like one adjective, and it's like anti-gay or woke or gay agenda or whatever it is. Like the urge to simplify like one of the largest companies into just this like one adjective, and I think it just shows how making movies is complicated. There are a lot of stakeholders in that game, and so you have companies like Marvel, who is under the umbrella of Disney, which again, like that, just that fact alone, that like here's a company whose parent company is Disney, but like so, Disney's not really making this movie. Like Marvel is making this movie. Maybe Disney has to sign off on certain things, so it's like even that alone is like should be enough to give people pause, because it's like, there's layers. Like it's like an onion, like there's layers to all of this. And then with Pixar, again, being like, a subsidiary of Disney, Disney's not making Pixar. It's like Disney gets to put their name on it, but like Pixar is making these movies. And so I think just that fact that there are companies within companies that are making the movies, and then there are executives throughout, and then there's producers throughout that have agendas, and those, it's not just like it's one guy calling all the shots.
Yeah, because I think because when you do that, the problem with doing that is like I feel like it dehumanizes a bit, or like it makes it like when you're just pointing at like Disney has this agenda, whatever the agenda is, or like or Angel Studios has, or like Warner Brothers, or any of these places has this agenda. Like you take humans out of it. Like it's this sort of this entity, and Disney is pushing this. Disney has this ideology, where like you were saying, that's clearly not the case, because that one thing you're pointing your finger and shaking it at like has hundreds, if not thousands of people that have at least some role in that process.
Yeah.
You could say people at Disney, or that, or just creatives, or just even wider. Like society there are people that are wanting to have these conversations, and that's filtering out into our movies. And I feel like that becomes a more fruitful starting point than just like this inhuman entity has these thoughts, and I'm against this, almost like this big cyborg robotic, movie company, rather than actually engage in there are people behind this, and you can still like critique that and engage with that.
Yeah.
But you're engaging with like people, not just sort of some big entity. I did think, like we said, we stuck a pin in it. We can take the pin back out. There's also, because there's total confirmation bias too. Like this, whatever perspective you want is going to be one of these stories you're going to throw out. One of them you're going to keep. Like, either you want Disney to have this agenda, you want Disney to have an anti-agenda. You just pick that, you ignore the other story.
Well, I think, over look at the headlines from like conservative media outlets and maybe more left-leaning media outlets, and just see like which headlines are they running with? Are they? Yeah, like and which ones are they ignoring?
Like, I don't think any of the Christian, or conservative, are unpacking the Inside Out 2 stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's not what sort of sells. They're going to definitely unpack the Marvel stuff.
Oh yeah,
that sort of
because you're going to get these like, see, we told you, and all this kind of stuff coming from more conservative.
Yeah,
areas.
So this is like again, we all know this is going on. Like we just, as far as the confirmation thing, this is just a very clear, because it's like two polarized stories at the same time. And I think it's also just like, I don't know. In one sense, you take what people say at face value. And I feel like you don't just, they say this, so therefore you can take it. But this is also coming from people that have their own perspective. Like if you watch the actual, like the Arbery Plaza interview, like if you don't know her as an actress, like she's a weird person. Like that's her thing. Like she her whole thing is to give weird interviews, and like on talk shows, she's gold on talk shows because she doesn't play along, and just sort of, she's not all polished. Like And I think like a lot of it is an intentional, like, she's not winging it. Like that's her act, is that she's just weird and she's gonna say things. And like if you actually watch the interview, like those quotes in context, like it's hard to get a sense. Like clearly the interviewer is trying to fish out an answer because he wants to have a narrative and he wants to use that. And it sort of seems like she just is just like, okay, whatever. I'm gonna give you, you want
it's super gay.
Yeah, it's gonna be the best. Go write that in an article. I'm gonna go, on to the next interview. Like that's the way it comes across.
Yeah.
Like, again, I haven't seen the show, so like, she might be telling the truth straight up. Like, if you guys have seen it, maybe let us know. Like, But so there is a sense of like, okay, you don't get the full context just by the buzzword quotes. Like, what's the thing? And then, on the other side of that, like the Inside Out 2, this is interviewing people that were just fired from this company.
Yeah.
That clearly, had maybe a high stress last go at it. It's like they're not, they don't have a vested interest in like making Pixar seem like
they may not have a lot of nuance when it comes to looking back at their former employer, so like I think that who knows the conditions under which they were let go and the terms and everything, but it's like there's a good chance that they're not like huge fans of Pixar at the moment, and so to come and give an interview, airing some laundry, I think that also plays into their perception of what was happening.
Yeah, so there's definitely more. Again, that doesn't mean that what's happening isn't true and that wasn't happening on set. Like, it's just maybe it would not be too quick to just embrace wholesale. This anonymous source that's bitter at the company said these things about this company, and therefore, or this actress.
But it confirmed my bias, so I want to embrace it.
A weird actress on the red carpet just throwing out things. Now we take that as like, she is the official spokesperson for Hollywood, because she said that. Maybe one last thing, just about the Inside Out 2 thing, because even in the article, it tries to, like the people quoted are like, well, the queer kiss, like that wasn't a factor. They kind of trying to downplay,
in Lightyear.
Yeah, in Lightyear.
Why Lightyear failed,
don't keep, Lightyear was a colossal bomb at the box office.
Yeah.
But don't use the queer kiss. That's not the reason. Like that's essentially the argument they're making.
Right.
There's
lots of things at play there,
It's an easy, to just point your finger at that one thing. But, maybe the queer kiss actually helped it and the other stuff. That's sort of the perception you get, which that's not true. I think it's true that the queer kiss and that element wasn't the sole defining factor. I think there's a lot of reasons it's not a good movie is the main factor. Why people don't go back and watch it again. Inside Out 2 is a good movie. It did well. You're not a good movie. That's just sort of how it works. But to say that it wasn't a factor, I think is just, that's putting your head in the sand like an ostrich. There's the movie had so much going for it. That if it had bad trailers or marketing, or it was kind of confusing story of it's the real Buzz Lightyear, but it's not the toy, and even with all those, it might not have done well, but to just bomb.
Well, it's sort of like entry level, freshman level core classes in college. It's you have to work pretty hard to fail those. At least in my experience, all your professors are on your side. You got to not go to class, not turn in homework, not do the test to bomb a class. And it's with the property that Lightyear had, it's you've got to work really hard to make that a bomb.
Yeah, beloved studio, based loosely on a beloved property.
Yeah, you had every advantage you could possibly want going into that movie, and it bombed horribly. And so, yes, there's probably other factors that were at play, but. And again, I think this goes back to sort of that, how I like to look at some of these issues is sort of that dividing line of is this for kids or is this not for kids? And so, and I think Lightyear especially was for kids, and it had one of their marketing points was that it has the first queer kiss in it. And it's all right, well, my guess is a lot of people said, I'm not taking my kids to that if that's your selling point. And so I think when we evaluate some of these things, if there's the gayest, if Agatha all the way down is the gayest Marvel thing ever, fine, that's okay. But again, if they were trying to market that to kids, I think that would be a different issue.
Even take out the queer aspect of it, if as a parent, if the marketing, all the red carpets and producers are this movie is so important because of this kiss. Because of this romantic thing, and I'd be okay, well, my kids are, at the time were 6 or 7, or maybe that's not the movie I need to go see then.
Yeah,
I don't, maybe I'll see a different movie. I don't need. That's not what they need to be exploring. And if that's the selling point, that's
right.
Not a whole lot of talk about just the movie and the story. It's this is an important movie because of this romantic sexualized thing. It's to act like that wasn't a contributing a major. Perhaps the biggest factor, I think, is just naive, and I think it does show. And then we can move on, that there is some power in kind of the whole vote with your wallet stuff. I'm tend to be pretty anti boycott. I don't.
Yeah.
If I don't, Agatha all along. I'm not going to watch it because I don't think it's good. And then the quotes, I don't necessarily want to go watch it, for the gay explosion or whatever. So I'm just going to not watch it. It doesn't necessarily I'm going to write a bunch of angry articles and pick it outside Disney or something. I'm just not going to watch it. Again, I'm still paying for Disney, so I guess I'm not voting with my wallet. But that mindset of
right.
Lightyear, I reviewed it, didn't take them to see it in theaters because I wasn't sure, and I just don't want that storyline. So I kind of voted with my wallet. Then I boycotted it. I wasn't telling a bunch of other people, but it does show that Hollywood does listen. As much as we think they don't, money matters. And
and money will ultimately drive, a lot of these decisions, as you can see. And again, if what some of those employees are saying about Inside Out 2, it's you can bet that these producers and the executives, they're thinking bottom dollar, is this going to be a financial success or not? And if you've got some culture stuff you're trying to get in there, that may get chopped just because it's well, we want to make this as broadly applicable as possible. And so we're not going to take any risks with this. And I think, to pull the accolade back into this from the most recent Star Wars bomb, it's a movie where everything was about how important it was and how all these things, nothing to do with the actual show or the characters, everything about how culturally important this was. And to me, that's always from either side. we can throw, the Forge under the bus again if we want to, but like this is important because discipleship is important. It's like anytime all your big talking points are sort of external to the actual movie or show, then that's typically a flag that it's probably not going to be a good show. And it's like, and they turn out not to be, and they don't get renewed for a second season, or there's not a sequel or whatever. And so some of this is like kind of nature taking its course in a way.
And that it takes a long time. Because I think I was going to mention The Acolyte too. Like the fact that the way that they framed that show and that it did so bad, like that is absolutely going to affect the upcoming Star Wars shows. Like if Agatha All Along doesn't do well, like this show is coming out now. Like it's based on the first show they ever made, the WandaVision show, which was like years ago.
Yeah.
Like, the show's been in development for a long time. Like I think sometimes we expect sort of instant.
Right.
Like, well, we're mad at this. This movie did bad. Therefore, the movie that comes out next month is going to be different. And it's like, well, like these things take years to make. Like any kind of change and like course correcting you're going to see that years down the line.
Right.
I think it's, if the last Disney one fails, if the Marvel one fails, like the Pixar one failed for trying to incorporate some of these themes and stuff. Like you're absolutely going to see less of those in the mainstream because money does matter. But speaking of money and cinematic universes and themes, the Chosen. So this is like things might not be going well for Marvel or Pixar until Inside Out 2 or Disney, but things are going well for Jesus and his disciples.
That's
At
true.
least their cinematic equivalents. Because we actually talked about I think we looked it up. One was like about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, March of 2023.
On one of the previous iterations of this, the Collision Live for you old timers. Like we talked about, there was rumblings of like a Bible cinematic universe.
Yeah.
Which I mean, on the surface, makes me cringe a little bit. But sort of this idea that the Chosen's doing so well, faith-based in general is doing well. Like you're gonna see. Kind of like what we were just talking about, money matters, or at least success matters, and things do well. It's like, hey, this did well. Why don't you have 10 of them? That's sort of the mindset.
What could go wrong?
And that seems to be the case with kind of another 2 for 1, because there's one about the Chosen, one about the Passion of the Christ. We can kind of treat both those maybe together. But it was just sort of announced at, I think it was called like the Chosen Con. If you want to know how successful your show is, when you have your own
con.
We're just centered on your one show that you have. That's pretty crazy. But where they announced a new kind of studio from the creators of The Chosen, Dallas Jenkins, 5 and 2 Studios, which I didn't look up. I'm assuming that's some biblical.
I'm thinking reference. 5 loaves and 2 fish.
That's probably what it is.
I feel pretty smart.
More well versed.
Because I was like, "What is that 5 and 2?" I was like, "Oh, I'm sure that's."
Yeah, that's got to be what
100%.
Take it to the bank. So the indie studio plans to produce Bible-inspired stories through uniquely human and authentic storytelling and audience engagement, which is actually quite vanilla of a mission statement. But they did announce maybe more exciting, especially if you're a fan of The Chosen, kind of like their slate of shows coming up. So I thought we could kind of walk through some of these and then what we're excited about. The first one is The Chosen Adventures, which I think is going to be the next thing that comes out, sort of following after The Chosen. They're going animated with it, where this is like an animated kids show of Jesus wandering in the wilderness, and he meets kids, which I think is like one of the first. I've only seen some of the first season of The Chosen, and one of those probably the best episodes is like Jesus in the wilderness, and there's kids, and he's interacting with them. I think it's like episode 2 or 3 of the show. It seems like it's gonna be an animated version of that, like just Jesus interacting with kids, kind of in animated. And somewhere says, Jenkins says, without there's something there, seeing Jesus through the eyes of kids. We're not going to expand on that, the mothership show. But if we took time with that, an animated show that was witty and fun and adults can appreciate, we really wanted to get that right. And he kind of talks about how it's not going to necessarily just be like super kiddie, but just, something that kids can enjoy. So that's the one show. Another one, unscripted show, The Chosen in the Wild with Bear Grylls, kind of a 6-episode like live TV, or I think Jenkins and then Bear Grylls essentially sort of do like a man versus wild or whatever, but somehow related to The Chosen. I don't, a baptized version of that, which again, Bear Grylls is a Christian if you've, follow his life and ministry or shows or whatever. The other show, a couple shows they announced. One I think after The Chosen finishes. Like, so the next sort of flagship show they'll have is about Moses. They didn't say a name, just that it's about Moses. That's going to be like a 3-season run, kind of following the 3 stages of Moses' life. And then they briefly mentioned an Acts of the Apostles show and a limited series about Joseph. So maybe we'll talk about this first, then we can just mention, or do you want to talk about the Passion?
We can talk about this first, and then we'll move on to, I think, the Passion stuff, because I feel like they are somewhat different.
Yeah, I think they are. Yeah, they're different. Share some Venn diagrams, but they're
There's some overlap for sure.
What are some of your thoughts? One, just in general about this whole like.
I mean, I'm not
Chosen universe, and then 2 about the specific shows.
I'm not at all surprised, and there was like a bunch of drama too with like Angel Studios and The Chosen wanting to break off, and it's like, okay, now The Chosen makes its own studio because it wants to make a biblical cinematic universe. I don't think any of that is surprising. Again, it'll just be one of those, like, let's wait and see. Like, I don't want to, like, get my hopes up about shows, especially with, like, tackling, like, biblical narratives, because I feel like those can, there's not a lot of, like, middle ground with those. I feel like they're either good or really bad and, like, cringy. And so I think we'll wait and see. I don't know. Like, I may be interested, but I'm not just like, wow, I can't wait.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to if it's good, like you said. I think I'm somewhat indifferent to this. Like, I'm not a big Chosen person. I'm not an anti-Chosen person. It has never excited me. And I watched most of the first season. Yeah, and I was like, yeah, like it's not bad. Like, it's definitely no. I can see why people like it. It's just it doesn't interest me. Like, I don't. Yeah, it's not necessarily exploring things, and I do have some. I don't know. There is some, at least mild, ickiness to me about, or just unease about, like, Jesus portrayed in a fictional way. Yeah. And like, I don't know, giving lines of dialogue to Jesus and things like. Well, and
and maybe the most squeamish thing about it is the Jesus and the Kids animated series, because I just feel like, okay, where are you gonna go with that? And like, are you just gonna be like, I don't know.
That's off the book, because you don't get that, you don't get those stories in the Bible.
And so to me, I was like, I don't know about that. Who doesn't love Bear Grylls? I don't know. Like, is it going to be like a?
That one just strikes me as like a, sort of like you guys liked High School Musical, we got Sunday School Musical. It's like there's always sort of that show, but like this one's going to have the maker of The Chosen, and I don't know. Maybe they're going to talk about like. This is sort of like when John the Baptist was in the, like, I don't know if they'll tie it in that way, or if the only catch is like it's the same show. It's just this one has a Christian on it. And it's like,
okay,
I don't know. Like, we sort of already have the, unless it's like very different.
I wonder if it's more like if there's going to be more like life lessons doled out from Bear rather than just like survival tactics. Like, because I could see him doing Bear Grylls all his life. He I don't think he really got to share much of his personal.
Yeah, this would definitely give him the opportunity.
So I'm betting this is like
Christian,
right? Yeah,
and they allow that to not get edited out.
Yeah, I could see this being like, hey, you can bring in a lot of like life wisdom and Christian wisdom into these circumstances of survival and being out in nature and stuff, which I can appreciate nature, but it's But yeah, it is one of those, like, is it going to just be like a...
Yeah, that one's the least exciting to me. Yeah. The Moses one is probably the one...
Yeah.
Maybe the Acts, but that intrigues me the most, because I do think there is so much potential in, like, telling biblical stories well.
Yeah.
And, like, helping people see the Bible stories from a different perspective. And like, by making it about Moses, I mean, you still have... I'm sure, God will be speaking through burning bush. Like, unless you're just pulling from Scripture, like... It at least dances around the areas that I'm not sure about with The Chosen. With like, it's different to me to like add, to make up storylines and subplots and dialogue for Moses than it is to like speak on behalf of Jesus. Like, to me, that not even that's necessarily can't be done.
And that's why, like, I don't know. That's why I think the last time we talked about this, when we were talking about sort of the biblical cinematic universe, is like, I think the interesting thing is to just place interesting stories. They could be totally made up, but like have a story about a family that leaves Egypt, and it's like at a distance, this is us, this is our exodus, but it's about this family or this, you could have several like offshoot. I mean, it's totally like made up storylines of these people, but it's like this could be what some of these people went through as they're following this crazy guy Moses, through the, so I think
see the Bible stuff through the eyes of someone else rather than through the eyes of.
So I just think that gives you way more creative freedom and to tell really interesting stories without kind of having to pin yourself into like, this is the like you can have the Bible narrative, you can kind of see it going past, but the story is,
because even like the Joseph one, like, I guess it depends on what Joseph they're talking about, but like if it's like the father of Jesus, like I don't know about showing like a baby Jesus.
Oh, I was thinking it would be like Joseph, like
coat of many
colors thing.
Which I'd be okay with that. Like I don't know. It's the being around the Jesus stuff that I don't know about. But I think they have a track record to show they can do this well.
Yeah.
I think they have the money to do it well. Speaking of money, sort of the other thing, we don't need to spend really any time on this, but just like it does seem as they're expanding, like I think we've got accustomed to sort of The Chosen is like it's a show, but it's kind of a missional show.
Yeah.
Like it's free. You can watch it on any app and stuff. Where it seems like that's not going to be the case for this new it's more they're going to be pitching this to like Netflix and other places, and they talk about and if we can find takers, like they're going to find takers because The Chosen is bigger than any of the stuff that the other studios are doing. Like I don't think that's going to be the problem.
Right.
So it is going to lose. Like, I guess it's to not lose sight that this is still a business. Like, I think the people making it, I think, have the right heart, and hope, and will do. They even say in the interview, like they're going to go out of their way to try and make this available and missional still. It's just that it's also going to be very much a business run by money and things, which maybe I don't know if that takes some of the shine off of it, but I think it's also just a reality of the situation. Kind of the other related thing for this biblical stories and the explosion of that is there's some new reports. These things have been floating around for a while, but this one seems like it's legitimate that this is actually happening. No, not just the hype, and that is the Passion of the Christ 2. The sequel to Mel Gibson's The Passion, which I forget what year that came out in. Like it's been a long time since that.
It's been like 20 years.
Yeah, like 2004 or something. I don't know. I know it's been a long time.
But
the reports are that Mel Gibson, he's been like scouting locations, and that production is expected to start in 2025, so next year, which means the movie probably will come out in 2026. So it's still on the horizon, distant horizon, but it's coming closer because we're actually getting close to this
near future.
And I've seen interesting. People are really excited for this movie. The working title I think is Passion of the Christ: Resurrection, which was one of the big critiques for the Passion movie. Is that it's the Passion. It's the crucifixion. And then you get like a little end, a couple seconds of like the tomb opening and the light, and then it's done. You don't really have it's a partial story. I guess.
Yeah.
I think that's
a part one for sure.
Yeah, it's like not even like a sequel as much as it is like you sort of need both those together, and it's like doing part one, part two. Like you cut it in half, and then they haven't made the second half. So that part does excite me. That I think which I've shared before. Like I'm not crazy about the Passion movie. I haven't seen it for a long time. And one of the reasons I'm not is that I feel like it lacked the spiritual element. It very much was just let's sort of shock people with the violence, especially at that time it was made.
And the gore,
the gore, and just you almost feel like you're getting beaten up in this theater as you're watching. It's sort of designed to make you feel bad. Isn't it awful how much physical pain Jesus suffered for you, which is true. Jesus suffered a lot of physical pain, but it wasn't able to convey anything about the spiritual, actually bearing the sins of the world, what I think are the bigger, pain, the bigger sacrifice that Jesus made.
Right.
So I do think that's exciting. Although, and this isn't a recent interview, but some of the insight that if you're going to pick, as Gibson has talked over the years, apparently one of the holdups for the movie has been trying to decide, well, how do you do that? There's a reason maybe they didn't do that in the first movie. They didn't know how. And in 2022, he had an interview Gibson did, where he said this. Said it's not a linear narrative. You have to juxtapose the central event that I'm trying to tell with everything else around it in the future, in the past, and in other realms. And that's kind of getting a little sci-fi out there. It's a big story, it's a difficult concept, and it's taken me a long time to focus and find a way to tell a story that really delivers. And then later he goes on to say, describe the project as an acid trip, fueling online speculation the sequel will have a supernatural focus. That doesn't excite me at all.
No?
I would even go as far to say that that's like anti-excites me. That repels me. I don't know. Like I don't think of like the resurrection and think like, you know what this telling needs? It just needs to be a bit more like psychedelic.
Yeah.
You know, it needs to be a little more, we need a bit more sci-fi.
A little trippier.
In our, resurrection story. And they talk about the, some of the speculations that it will play off, which is more like a Catholic theological thing about like Jesus like actually descending and expending those 3 days in hell, which again isn't really a biblical concept.
Yeah.
It's more traditional, like where was he in those 3 days? Like, I guess he must have been in hell. And like, that maybe that's what the story will do, and you're gonna see like. So I don't know. Like I wasn't necessarily super excited. I think it's a powerful story, and obviously like to have out there. I don't know. Like, are you?
Yeah.
Are you excited for sci-fi resurrection?
Not really. Not particularly. It's one of those things that it's. I think like. Yeah, depending on what resurrection story are you trying to tell, and I think that will speak to a lot of whether or not it's going to be worthwhile, and I think if it's just sort of like the harrowing of hell story, then maybe not so much. But I think there is a lot that you could do. Like we do know a lot of what Christ did after the resurrection, and I think there's a lot of interesting things that you could do as he's coming back to the disciples after the resurrection and those 40 days, which I think would be I think it could be a very interesting story and a very interesting movie, but it doesn't seem like that's the direction that old Gibson is going to go with this.
If you sort of focus more on like almost like, the Acts, like the disciples and the power of God poured out and like God appearing, so that so much of that, the part of the story they seem to be covering isn't known really, like what he was appearing to people. Like I know you need to add some sort of like tension and cinematic stuff, and it just seems like the ways that they're at least initially been thinking of doing that isn't what I want to see. And but I will definitely be interested in seeing what they
do. It can be added to the pantheon of biblical cinematic universe movies.
Yeah, and if you don't like that, then The Chosen will probably have a couple of shows centered on those things. So we have more options than we did back when Mel Gibson was first doing that. Speaking of options and things you can choose to watch or not watch, the next segment of this podcast we have out now and coming soon. So the big movies that are out now, the first one is Transformers 1, which I don't think it did all that well. Kind of sad, because if you saw my review, it's a good movie. It's a really good movie.
You liked it? Your boys liked it?
Yeah. I took my kids, both 9. Check out my review, my video review, because one of my kids joins me and does a good job. So go to the comment on it and let him know how awesome he is. He will appreciate that. But I like the movie a lot. Like, I wasn't excited at all because the Michael Bay movies are like unwatchable trash that you couldn't pay me to go watch one of those movies. So I wasn't excited about this, and like it's animated, so it's like kiddie, but it's not. It's really good, although it does have some profanity in it, which is one of my pet peeves. So check out my review. I'll get more into that, but a good movie. The other thing that's out is, and we don't have as much time as I wanted to. Maybe next week we'll do a bigger review. But Rings of Power is still going. So we were off last week.
6 episodes in.
So episode 5 and 6, both good in my opinion.
Yeah, liked it. It's the tension's building. The heat is on.
Yeah, it seems like we got a big battle next week.
On the cusp of war.
There's some good fantasy battle. It's hard to go wrong.
Deception, turmoil, inner conflict. It's all good.
Yeah, definitely have some like nitpicks and stuff, which maybe next week we'll get into more.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it because I'm so not a card-carrying member of the Tolkien Society, but I've been enjoying it. So
I'm still on board. I think overall season 2 seems like it's got way more momentum.
But we've got a few movies coming out soon.
We do. We got the kind of the big one, The Wild Robot, which actually looks really good. I don't know if you've seen any of the.
I have not.
Another like DreamWorks animated, and it sort of seems like almost like a WALL-E type thing, where like a robot's on Earth and kind of raised by animals and becomes this like you're a robot, but you have emotions and stuff. And I don't know, that's awesome. Very even the music and stuff. it's going to be one of those movies.
Well, if it's in the feel of WALL-E, then I'm on board.
Which is not a Pixar movie, but it seems kind of similar to that. So I'm excited for that. I'll be checking that out this week, and so check out my review on Friday. The other one, Megalopolis, is it's an intriguing movie because it's they get legendary director coming back from a long time off, self-financed. A movie that hasn't got great reviews, but it's very ambitious, and I'm intrigued by it. I'm not sure, just with my schedule, if I'll be able to check this one out or not for a review, but I'm hoping to. Have you seen the trailers for this?
I have. Yeah, it's super fascinating, and just with Francis Ford Coppola directing and like funding it, it seems like, to me, that's interesting, and like that could go really well or it could go really badly.
Yeah, and it just seems like even if the movie itself isn't great, I want to see these sort of things made.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to go check it out.
Yeah, for sure.
So stay tuned. I may have a review if I can make that happen. But what I do know can offer you, for sure, which you will definitely enjoy and won't be divisive, is the next segment of this podcast. We have things we like that you should like too.
Well, this week, my wife and I just finished the very last ever special from the Grand Tour, formerly known as Top Gear, with the three wise men, Jeremy, Hammond, and May. If you aren't a fan of Top Gear or haven't watched any of the Grand Tour, it's these three old British guys who drive around crazy places in the world, and usually in very terrible cars, and it's a lot of fun. This is I think they've been doing it for 22 years or so. First as Top Gear, and then it was bought by Amazon, and it was then kind of rebranded as the Grand Tour. It's the same three presenters, and it's just, to me, it's hilarious. I love their humor, and it's just a lot of fun to see them. They're kind of driving through, I think it was Zambia or Zimbabwe this time. I can't remember now. But driving through Africa, cars break down. It's a lot of fun, and it's just sort of the ending of an era of TV, and I think some of the greatest TV ever made, and that is the Grand Tour, their last hurrah.
And they will be greatly missed. Although I will admit, this maybe goes to show the different sort of pop culture circles we swing in, that I think other than maybe a vague reference that you've mentioned this to me in the past, I couldn't tell you what this show was about or that this existed.
Yeah.
And then when you said it's been on for like 20 years, it's like, oh, okay.
It is, maybe not by you, but it is beloved by many, many people. And it's just really, I don't know, it was cool. And because it started off way more like car centric, like they would do reviews on cars, and they had this like their own track that they would like race the cars around, and they had like a leaderboard. So it was way more like car heavy. But they would always film these specials, which was like them doing some ridiculous road trip, like just the most insane stuff you can think of, like building their own like amphibious cars or like turning cars, and just all these like nutso things. And then so with the Grand Tour, it kind of became more just like their road trips and less about like reviewing cars and stuff.
This is more my speed. Like I don't care about cars, but I like British people.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge car guy. Like I know some stuff about cars, but it's just a lot, and just their humor and their banter is a lot of fun. So much so that my wife even enjoys the show. It's not something we have to force her to watch. So, and I think it's more the travel related aspect of it that she loves. So
if you guys are looking while you're waiting your time for the Biblical Cinematic Universe to air, if you need something else to watch, go check out that show and enjoy British people, because British people are just the best. But also the best is you guys. So we appreciate you guys joining us once again for another episode. Again, lots of interesting stuff to dive into. Always things going on in culture. I have no doubt that this coming week there will be more controversy stories and hopefully some things to celebrate and be positive about.
Indeed.
Those are always the best stories. But either way, we hope you will see us again next week for more conversations on faith and pop culture.